Okie doke. Oh, here comes Lori. Just one second. Okay, so I started recording, and good morning, everybody. We're in Joshua chapter 6, page 26 in the book. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. It's a long chapter, 27 verses. So I think we can get through it, though, because there's not much commentary to it. So let me read the whole thing in Hebrew and translate it, and then we'll get into it. So Joshua's about to start the battle, lead the battle with Jericho. And we had chapter 5 ended with with the appearance of an angel and how that spot which Jericho is seeing the angel is a holy place. And we talked about how it compared to Moses's vision of the burning bush and the similar language of Joshua having to take off his shoes, just like Moses had to take off his shoes. Okay. V'richo sogeret u'mesugeret mipnei b'nei Yisrael ein yotzei v'ein ba. Vayomer Adonai el Yehoshua, Re'ei natati v'yadcha et Yericho v'et Malka giborei hechayo. V'sabotem et ha'ir kol anshei hamilchama, hakef et ha'ir pa'am echat, ko ta'aseh sheshet yamim. V'shiv'a chohanim yis'u shiv'a shofrot hayovlim lifnei ha'aron, Uvayom hashvi'i tasobu et ha'ir sheva pa'amim, v'hakohanim yitku'u bashofarot. V'haya bimshoch bekeren hayovel, b'shom achem et kol hashofar, yariu kol ha'am teru'a gedola, v'nafla chomat ha'ir tachteha, v'alu ha'am ish negdo. Vayikra Yehoshua bin Nun el haKohanim, vayomer alehem, se'u et Aron habrit, v'shiv'a Kohanim yis'u shiv'a shofrot yovlim lifnei Aron Adonai. Vayomer, so it looks like it's supposed to be Vayomru, because there's a vav there, but the asterisk says to read it as Vayomer. Vayomer el ha'am, because it is Joshua speaking, so it's one, singular, Vayomer, as opposed to Vayomru el ha'am, which would mean they spoke to the people. Vayomer el ha'am, ivru v'sobu et ha'ir, v'hechalutz ya'avur lifnei Aron Adonai. Vayehi ke'emor Yehoshua el ha'am, V'shiva haKohanim nosim shiv'a shofrot hayovlim lifnei Adonai, avru v'tak'u b'shofarot v'Aron brit Adonai holech achareihem. V'hechalutz holech lifnei haKohanim, tok'ei, it's supposed to be a yud, not a vav, tok'ei hashofarot v'hame'asef holech acharei ha'Aron, haloch v'takoa b'shofarot. Ve'eta'am tziva Yehoshua lemor, lo tariu, ve'lo tashmiu et kolchem, ve'lo yetzei mipichem davar, ad yom omri alechem hariu v'hariotem. Vayasev Aron Adonai et ha'ir hakef pa'am echat, vayavo'u hamachane vayalinu b'machane. Vayashkem Yehoshua baboker, Vayis'u haKohanim et Aron Adonai. V'shiva haKohanim nosim shiv'a shofrot hayovlim lifnei Aron Adonai holchim haloch v'tak'u b'shofarot v'hechalutz holech lifneihem v'hame'asef holech acharei Aron Adonai haloch v'takoa b'shofarot. Vayasobu et ha'ir bayom hasheni pa'am achat vayashuvu hamachaneh ko asu Sheshet Yamim. Vayehi bayom hashvi'i, vayashkimu ba'alot hashachar, it's supposed to be Ka'alot HaShachar. Vayasobu et ha'ir kamishpat hazeh sheva pa'amim. Rak bayom ahu savavu et ha'ir sheva pa'amim. Vayihi bapa'am hashvi'it tak'u ha'kohanim b'shofarot. Vayomer Yehoshua el ha'am hariyu ki natan Adonai lachem et ha'ir. V'hayata ha'ir cherem hi v'chol asher ba l'Adonai. Rak rachav hazona tichye hi v'chol asher ita b'bayit. Hi hechbe'ata et ha'melachim asher shalachnu. V'rak atem shimru min ha'cherem pen tacharimu ulekachtem min ha'cherem v'samtem et machane Yisrael ha'cherem v'achartem oto. V'chol kesef v'zahav uchlei nechoshet uvarzel kodeshu l'Adonai otsar Adonai yavo. Vayara ha'am vayitkeu b'shofarot. Vayihi ki shmoa ha'am et kol ha'shofar. Vayariu ha'am teruah gedola. Vatipol ha'choma tachteha. Vaya'al ha'am ha'ira ish negdo. Vayilkedu et ha'ir. Vayacharimu et kol asher ba'ir. Me'ish va'ad isha mina'ar va'ad zaken. Va'ad shor v'seh v'chamor lefi charev. V'lishnayim ha'anashim hameraglim et ha'aretz amar Yehoshua bo'u beit ha'isha hazona v'hotziu misham et ha'isha ve'kol asher la ka'asher nishbatem la. Vayavo'u ha'ne'arim hameraglim v'yotziu et Rachav ve'et aviha ve'et ima ve'et acheha ve'kol asher la ve'kol mishpachoteha hotziu v'yanichum michutz l'machane Yisrael. V'ha'ir sarfu va'esh v'chol asher ba rak ha'kesef v'hazahav uchlei ha'nechoshet v'habarzel natnu otsar beit Adonai. V'et Rachav hazona v'et beit aviha v'et kol asher la hechaya Yehoshua v'teshev b'kerev Yisrael ad bo hazeh ki hechbi'a et hamelachim asher shalach Yehoshua leragel et Yericho. Vayashba Yehoshua ba'et ahi lemor arur ha'ish lifnei Adonai asher yakum uvana et ha'ir hazot et Yericho v'vechoro ye yasdena uvitziro yatziv delateha. Vayehi Adonai et Yehoshua vayehi shom'o b'chol ha'aretz. So Jericho was completely closed. So Geret umesugeret. It's like taking the word and repeating it in a slightly different form to show, to emphasize that it is closed. So it's completely closed up. Jericho is completely closed up from the people of Israel, right? In terms of military-wise, they're just protected from the people of Israel. There's no one leaving and no one entering. And God said to Joshua, behold, or see, I have given in your hands Jericho and its king and its mighty warriors. And you have surrounded the city, all the people of war, surround the city one time. Hi, Marlene. I'm reading the English translation now of chapter 6 of Joshua. So it's in this book, we're on page 27. So verse 3. So surround the city, all the people of war, surround the city one time, or make a circle. So hekif, the word for hakafot, the plural that we do on Simchat Torah, the circle dances that we do with the Torahs, those are called hakafot, circling. So hekif atayir, circle the city one time. This is what you should do for 6 days. So I think this means surround the city and circle it, like make a circle around, march around it once, do that for 6 days in a row. And verse 4, and 7 Kohanim should carry 7 Jubilee shofars. 7 priests shall bear 7 ram's horns before the ark. So I think that it's leaving out the word Yovlim. So I'm not sure why. So seven Jubilee shofars. So I'm not sure about this. We'll get to Alter in a little bit, see how he translates this. So 7 Kohanim should carry 7 Jubilee shofars before the ark. And on the 7th day, circle the city 7 times. And the Kohanim will blow the shofar. So for 6 days, they're circling the city. 7 Kohanim have the shofar in their hand. On the 7th day, they make 7 circles around the city. The Kohanim blow the shofar. And then verse 5, and when they are blowing the shofar, when they make a long blast, okay, bimshoch bekeren hayovel. So when they make a long blast, so yovel, I'm not sure how they're translating the word yovel here. I think it's just the ram's horn, but that's what keren means. So the Hebrew is a little bit odd, and so is the English translation. So when you make a long blast, when you hear the sound of the shofar, then all the people will make a great shout. But the word for shout is teruah. So are they blowing their own shofar with a teruah? Or does that just mean they're making a loud noise? So we'll see if the commentary says anything about that, or Alter says anything about that. So after the Kohanim blow the shofar, then that's the cue for the people to make a loud noise or blow the shofar, and the wall of the city will fall because of it, and the people will enter in before him, negdo, in front of it. So, and the people shall go up, every man straight before him. So yes, Bess.
So Shabbos is included.
Okay, that's interesting that comes to mind for you. Yes, it seems that way. Shabbos is included.
Okay.
So we don't know which day is the 7th day. So like what day of the week is this starting? But yes, it seems like it's 6 days in a row without taking off for Shabbos. So I don't know if even the commentary is thinking about that. It doesn't look like they're making making a comment about it.
No, it says 6 days.
Yeah, it's 6 days, but I don't know if it's 6 days in a row.
Right. That was one other question. And the other question is, they're not doing this 24 hours a day.
Well, right. It doesn't take that long to
day?
circle the city. So they just have to circle the city once
and go back to their camp.
And go back to the camp. That's right. They're making a show of force by circling the city, I think. And so that who's in the guard towers on the walls are seeing what the Israelites are doing. And then on the 7th day, I would think it's 6 days in a row. And there are certain things that Shabbos, can be, obviously to save a life, you can forego Shabbos laws. And the Shabbos laws, as far as the people are concerned, there are no rabbis yet to develop the Mishnah and the Gemara for all Shabbos laws. So all the people know is to have a day of rest, and the Kohanim offer an extra sacrifice for Shabbos. That's all it is. So if God's telling you not to rest and do this, you listen to God. So on this 7th day, you circle the city 7 times, then the Kohanim blow the shofar, and the people make noise as well, and then the wall falls down, and the people can enter the city. So, verse 6, Joshua, son of Nun, called the Kohanim and said to them, carry the Ark of the Covenant, and 7 Kohanim should carry 7 shofarot. So they're shofarot yovlim. is translated as ram's horns. So I don't, it's just, I'm just getting caught up. Bess is getting caught up on Shabbos. I'm getting caught up in how to translate the word Yovel here, because Yovel is usually Jubilee. So, and why it's not translated as Jubilee here, I don't know. So we'll look at all, like I said, we'll look at altar soon. So, so Joshua, son of Nun, calls the Kohanim together, says to them, carry the Ark of the Covenant, and 7 Kohanim should carry 7 Jubilee shofars before the Ark of God. And he said to the people, go and encompass the city, and okay, the hechalutz. So a chalutz in modern Hebrew, semi-modern Hebrew, like I would say 100 years ago, is a pioneer. Hechalutz leman avodah, avodah leman hechalutz. Right, that old-fashioned song that I remember learning in day school. So the pioneer is made for work, and work is made for the pioneer. Right, zoom golly 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 zoom golly golly. Okay, so that's in modern Hebrew what a chalutz is, but in biblical Hebrew, it's an armed soldier. So the armed soldier should go before the Ark of God as well. Verse 8. And it was when Joshua spoke to the people, and the 7 Kohanim carrying the 7 Jubilee shofars before God will pass and blow the shofars, and the Ark of the Covenant of God will go behind them. The armed soldier will go before the Kohanim, blowing the shofar, and the Hame'asef, the one bringing up the rear, would go after the ark, going and blowing the shofar. So Joshua's adding more details than what God said. This is logistically how we're going to make this work. Verse 10, and the people, and Joshua commanded the people, saying, don't make a noise, and don't let your voices be heard, and nothing should leave your mouths until the day when I say to you, make noise. Right? So you might be tempted to make noise by seeing on the 6 days when you're circling the city. No. Don't let yourself be tempted. Don't make any noise until I tell you. Verse 11. Circle the Ark of God. The Ark of God will circle the city one time, and they came into the camp and lodged in the camp. Joshua got up in the morning. The Kohanim carried the Ark of God, and the 7 Kohanim carrying the 7 Jubilee shofars before the Ark of God, going and blowing the shofar, and the armed soldier went before them, and the rear guard going after the Ark of God, blowing the shofar. 14. Yes.
I don't have time to read it twice. Joshua commanded the people, saying, don't shout, don't talk, don't make any noise. But he's telling this to them when they're doing the 6 before. Everything that's happened in verse 9 and previous, after the 6 days, but he had to say this before the first day. Right. So it's out of sequence.
Yeah, a little bit out of sequence. It's also unclear exactly what's happening on the 6 days. Are they blowing the shofar on the 6th day once? It's unclear.
Okay.
14. They surrounded the city on the 2nd day one time and went back to the camp. And this is what they did for 6 days. 15. And on the 7th day, they got up at dawn, surrounded the city according to this law 7 times. Only on that day did they surround the city 7 times. circle the city 7 times. 16, and on the 7th time, the Kohanim blew the shofars. Joshua said to the people, make noise, because God gave you the city. 17, and the city was, now here's a cherem. The city was cherem. So what does the cherem mean? So here it's translated in this Old English, and the city shall be devoted. I'm not so sure. I think it cherem in the Torah, and also I think here in Joshua, should be totally annihilated. I think that's what cherem means. So the city should be totally annihilated, it and all that is in it, for God, like annihilated in the name of God. So to be cherem before God, so in modern Hebrew, cherem is excommunication. But in Torah and biblical Hebrew, cherem is used, it's not about a person being in cherem, because a person being in cherem would be karet, kaf, resh, taf, that word. So if you do certain laws that you violate, the penalty is karet. You're cut off from the community. That in modern Hebrew is what cherem is. But in biblical Hebrew, that's karet. Cherem is applied to a military act of annihilation that is done in the name of God. So this cherem is what's being done to the city and all its inhabitants. Only Rachav, the prostitute, should be kept alive, her and all who is with her in the house, because she hid the messengers that we sent. 18, and you should be observant of the cherem, unless you be subject to the cherem, and you so in other words, you're not allowed to touch anything from the cherem. Everything is cherem. You're not allowed to touch it. And if you take anything, then if you touch anything or take anything from the city of Jericho, because all of it's supposed to be dedicated to God and annihilated, then you'd be putting the whole camp of Israel in cherem, and you would be the achartem oto, which means you would be troubling it. Not sure that that's really the impact of the word achartem. I think it's more than troubling. We'll see what how he translates it. And all the silver and gold and vessels of copper and iron. That's how I'm translating it. It says brass. For Nechoshet, it's unclear. Some people translate, in modern Hebrew, Nechoshet is copper. Sometimes it's bronze, sometimes it's brass. I'm not sure why it has those different translations. But it does, all the metal vessels, so the possible metals at that time were silver, gold, copper, and iron. So all those vessels are holy to God, and they would be in the God's treasury to come. Right? In other words, you're going to gather in the metal, anything made of metal that you see, everything else is destroyed. The metal vessels you keep, and they're going to be dedicated to God, and they go into a storehouse for God. So the Otsar could be treasury. That's in modern Hebrew. Like the treasury minister in Israel is called Sar HaOtsar. Okay, so that's treasury. But Otsar can also mean storehouse. Okay, so that all the metal goods are going to be in a storehouse dedicated to God.
Was that the same word when Joseph kept the grains in storage?
Yes, very good. Yes, it is the same word. So that's why I'm saying it's storehouse and not necessarily treasury. So, because treasury implies money or valuables. Okay, verse 20, the people made noise, they blew the shofars, and when the people heard the sound of the shofar, the people made a great noise, and the wall fell under it, that is, because of the noise, and the people entered the city. Every person met their counterpart in the city, and they took the city. 21, Vayacharimu, they put to cherem everything in the city, right? And they annihilated, they destroyed everything in the city, from man to woman, from old to young, from ox to sheep to donkey, put to the sword. 22, and for 2 men, the spies of the land, Joshua said, go to the house of the prostitute woman, bring out from there the woman and all that she has, as you swore to her. 23. So the young lads, the spies, came, and then brought out Rachav and her father and her mother and her brothers and all that she has, and all of her family they took out, and they put them outside of the camp of Israel. And the city, verse 24, they burned with fire and all that is in it. Only the silver and the gold and the vessels of copper and iron did they put in the treasury in the house of God. Just a note here for a second. I believe archaeologists have dug in Jericho and have seen a layer in the wall of the city that is completely burnt. And I think they have done carbon testing on that burnt section of the wall and found it to date back to around the time when this could have happened. Okay, yes, Barry.
What would the house of God be, since there wasn't a temple?
Right. So maybe it's in the Mishkan. Right, they had the Mishkan. So we'll probably see in Joshua, if not in Judges, where they set up the Mishkan in the city of Shiloh. But until now, we're assuming that the Mishkan is still standing, right? So they set up camp in Gilgal, assuming that the Mishkan is there and sacrifices are happening. And Rachav the prostitute and her father's house and all that she has, Joshua kept alive and settled them in the midst of Israel until this day. Because, so in other words, Rachav and her family, till this day, whatever day that is, that they're part of the community of Israel. Because she hid the messengers that Joshua sent to spy Jericho. 20, yes?
I forgot, what were her people, Canaanites?
They're whatever the city of Jericho is, I think they're Canaanites. But I'm not, yeah, go ahead.
Is the Hebrew word for harlot, prostitute, and whore the same? Because they've used interchange. I think Alter uses whore. Harlot, I think, is the traditional word, and you just mentioned prostitute.
I don't know. I just look up. I guess if you Google the word, look at the which is the older term. I don't know.
But in Hebrew, it's the same word.
Yes, zonah in Hebrew is a prostitute, or a whore, or a harlot,
same
or
word.
any other kind of word that you want to apply to that kind of person who engages in that business.
So it's the English translation that's being either diplomatic or a little more.
Yes, even in the commentary in the Hertz Chumash, because chapter 1 of Joshua of sending these spies is a haftarah for the portion Shlach Lecha in Numbers So because it's in the Chumash, Hertz translates it as innkeeper. Yeah, so it takes all the sexual component out of the job and makes it into a very G-rated story instead of an R-rated story.
Because I seem to remember the story of Onan's father,
Judah.
Judah, yeah, of course, Judah. She's definitely referred to as the harlot. You know, the
Right,
harlot
she
on the side of
plays the
road.
harlot. That's right. Yes.
But here it's prostitute. I think Alter calls
It's
it.
the same. It's the same word.
Same
I
word.
wouldn't get unless there's a difference between them in English translation. I think they're just interchangeable. So I wouldn't get caught up on the English translation. I think I just know that this English translation is written about 100 years ago. So it's whatever whatever was common in the English language then. Why they would go back and forth between prostitute and harlot, I don't know. So I really don't know if there's a difference between the two words. So is one an independent contractor and is the other part of a business handled by a pimp? Does that make a difference then in how you're referred to? I don't know. The end result in what the business she's engaging in is the same.
To me, the word whore sounds more negative, insulting.
Right, and harlot doesn't? I don't know. Like I don't know, like mothers tell their daughters, you look like you're dressing like a prostitute, or you're dressing like a harlot, or you're dressing like a whore. I think you're saying the same thing, right?
Slut.
Okay, right. Okay. So yes.
We can do this for an hour.
Okay. So anyway, so that's what the word zonah is. All right, verse 26. And this is recorded now and it's for posterity. So Joshua swore at that time, saying, "Cursed be the man before God who would go up and build this city, Jericho. Bivachoro yeyasdena." So that means with the loss of his firstborn shall he lay the foundation thereof. So if he dares to lay the foundation, his firstborn son will die. Uvitziiro yatziv delateha. And his youngest son, yes, with the loss of his youngest son, will he be setting up its doors or its gates, right? Okay, so in other words, this is poetic. And by using this poetry saying, if any man in Israel dares to rebuild the city, then they will be punished by having their firstborn son and youngest son die. Okay, so nobody should build up the city of Jericho. Obviously, the city of Jericho got rebuilt. Who rebuilt it? Unclear. Was it part of the land, the territory of the land of Israel? Also unclear. Okay, like in other words, in the Mishnah, when the rabbis define what's the land of Israel that is subject to agricultural law and what is outside the land of Israel, Gaza is outside the land of Israel. Galilee is a question mark, and I'm not sure about Jericho. I don't know if Jericho counts as being part of the land of Israel or not. Okay, but Jericho is known for having great date palms, and they're still there today in that whole region. In other words, if you ever travel from Jerusalem to the Dead Sea and go by directly east from Jerusalem, instead of the roundabout way to go west and south and then north. So instead of taking a big circle to avoid the Palestinian territories, if instead you just go directly east out of Jerusalem, and you'd have to go through a checkpoint at some point then on the way down to the Dead Sea. If you go that way and then head south to Masada, you pass a lot of date palm groves. So they've been around for thousands of years.
Jonah,
Yes.
when you say that the city has been rebuilt, but you also said that they found evidence of charred remains in
Yeah.
what was, I guess, the original old city. So did they build outside the city?
No, you just, whenever the wall falls down, you build on top of it again and use the same material to rebuild. It happens a lot in old cities, or especially what's called a tell. This mound that could be in a city or right outside of it, anywhere in Israel. That's just called a tell. It's probably in Jordan and other areas of the Middle East. You just have this where when the city is conquered, it's destroyed and it's flattened, and then you build on top of it using the same material and new material to rebuild, or maybe even to expand a little bit. So archaeologists find the different levels in this city, and they found it with Jericho. So
during the rebuilding process, then.
What I'm saying is that as the city has been rebuilt many times over the centuries, because the city has been conquered many times over the centuries, the archaeologists, in looking at the wall and the material, like digging through the different layers, see the different strata, which point out different time periods that people were living there. And in one of them, I'm almost sure, you can Google it to see archaeological evidence for Joshua Jericho. I think that they have found evidence of burnt stones that are in the wall or near the wall from that time period. So, but they can't prove who burnt it or what the circumstances were. In other words, nobody wrote graffiti, Joshua was here, okay, or anything like that. So those who want to find evidence for biblical stories as being true history can find it. Those who just see evidence of burnt stones see evidence of burnt stones from 1200 or 1300 BCE. Oh, that's around the time of Joshua, maybe. Oh, so maybe there's evidence of Joshua, but that's about as far as you can go. You can't prove it. Can't prove it. Okay. So, yeah, go ahead.
When I was in Israel, in I think it was Accra, we went up to see where they had dug up, and you had the remains of a city, and then you would go down another level, and there's another city there.
Exactly right.
Or remains from another city.
That's right.
And someone had said, "Well, how far down does it go?" They said, You just keep on digging until you find nothing.
That's right. That's exactly right. So that's what archaeologists do. And, Megiddo is such a site in northern Israel. There are plenty of sites like this that throughout Israel that just have these. It's called Tel. The city of Tel Aviv is named Tel Aviv for that purpose, because here you're taking a tell, which you read Mishnah's The Source is all about this, digging through the different layers, and he tells the historical fictional account of people who lived in that particular made-up town that Mishnah makes up to kind of tell the story of the land of Israel, right? So that's just how it works in all ancient cities like that. And then verse 27 ends the story, and God was with Joshua and his name was great in the whole land. Okay, so that's the story of the conquest of Jericho. So let's take a look at the commentary again. There's not much commentary on it. So back to page 26 on the bottom right. Now Jericho. A parenthetical verse interrupting the narrative of the appearance of the captain of the host of the Lord. right? So that's from verse 15. And now, if we just read this in context, as we keep on going in the story, that Jericho at the time, parenthetically, was completely closed up. But this captain of the Lord of hosts doesn't appear again. At least in chapter 6, he doesn't appear. Maybe in chapter 7, he'll appear again. But yes, I'm not sure why the commentary says it's parenthetical. I think it's just starting a new subject. Because of the people, the children of Israel, from fear of them. That's why Jericho was completely locked up. 27, page 27, the Lord said through his angel, this verse continuing verse 15. Oh, interesting. So, okay, so I'm not sure why the commentary does that. I've maybe to say that, because the angel doesn't go away, and at least we're not told that the angel goes away. So the fact that God is speaking to Joshua in verse 2 could mean that it's the angel speaking to Joshua, and therefore that's how the story continues. Okay, I'm not so sure you have to read it that way. I think we can just say now that the angel just appeared to just bolster Joshua's confidence. And then God's talking to him, giving him command of what to do, just like God spoke to him in the previous chapters of what to do with the stones in the Jordan River. Okay. We continue in verse 2, 127 in the commentary, have given the prophetic perfect. Again, that's just the special way that prophets are addressed. 7 times, this number in Hebrew is often symbolic of completeness. Why 7? Why not 6 or 8? Shall fall down flat, literally shall fall in its place. Modern excavations have shown that the walls of Jericho were not breached, but sank down in their place as from the effect of an earthquake. The miraculous manner of Jericho's capture was intended to emphasize to Israel at the outset of their task 2 thoughts. First, that God was with them, and second, that not by their own strength would they conquer, even when they fought in the usual manner. Moses had warned them against the presumption of saying, my power and the might of my hand has gotten me this wealth, lest thy heart be lifted up, and thou forget the Lord thy God. So just the commentary is just reminding us that perhaps this whole idea of why they're doing it this way is to show, don't think that you're strong enough to conquer the city of Jericho yourself. You may very well be, but the only reason you're going to be successful in conquering is because God's with you. And doing it this way reminds you that God is with you. Okay. That could be appropriate. I think it would be appropriate in ancient battle against the city to kind of surround the city, to present as mighty a show of force as possible. So that's not so unusual. And maybe even sounding shofars is not unusual either. Maybe that's to instill fear in the inhabitants. Get ready for the end. But perhaps doing it in this particular way, circling once every day for 6 days in a row, and then circling 7 times, makes it a God-commanded way to do it. So page 28, verse 7, he said, so the Kri, the way that we're supposed to read it, the Ketiv, the way it's written, has they said, namely the priests. So in other words, in verse 7, is it Joshua talking to the people, or is it the priests talking to the people? And clearly the rabbis, in deciding that we're supposed to read it as he spoke to the people, think that Joshua is supposed to be speaking. The armed body, that's the chalutz. The army was to be there, but would take no part in the attack. Jericho was not to fall through their prowess. This would confirm their dependence upon God for victory subsequently when the soldiers did fight. So in other words, they're only fighting after the walls came down and killing everybody. Before the Lord, the divine presence was symbolized by the ark. The armed men, the men of the 2.5 tribes who led the army. Okay, that's interesting. So the commentary is just adding these armed men are from God, Asher, God, and half of Manasseh, right? Those 2.5 tribes. The strangeness of the procession, an army making a daily circuit round the city in silence, would strike terror in the hearts of its inhabitants. Okay, that's about why Joshua was telling them to be quiet. On the 7th day, verse 15. Oh, here's Shabbos. Tradition relates that it was the Sabbath, which, however, was not allowed to interfere with the prosecution of the war. There you go, Midrash. For Bess's point, what about Shabbos? So this war superseded Shabbos. Hence, in later times, the Maccabeans determined to defend themselves on the Sabbath after their first disastrous refusal to desecrate it by self-defense, which had resulted in heavy slaughter. They did not make an innovation in Jewish law. So in other words, so we'd have to know the details of the Maccabees' fights with the Greeks, and you just look at the books of Maccabees to get the details there of that. But there's in the account when they gathered together, because again they were Kohanim, so there's a sense that they were religious Jews, right? So that's part of the story, and again. It relates to how to spell the word Maccabee in Hebrew. Is Maccabee in Hebrew supposed to be with the letter Kuf, or is it supposed to be with the letter Kuf? Either way, there's a K sound, right? There are 2 ways to make the K sound in Hebrew. The letter Kuf, the backward C with a dot in it, or the letter Kuf, the letter that has the tail, right? So Maccabee spelled with a Kaf with a dot in it would be an abbreviation for Mi Kamocha Ba'elim Adonai. Who among you, who among all the gods is God, right? So it's an abbreviation for their religious factor, whereas Maccabee, spelled with a Kuf, just it means hammer. So it just represents their military aspect of who the Maccabees were. So certainly within Jewish tradition, the Maccabees should be spelled with the letter Kaf, and they're fighting for God. And so therefore, it would have been a right not to fight on Shabbos. But then they were wrong. And so here we have a precedent from the book of Joshua that it's okay to fight on Shabbos, if it's in the name of conquering the land of Israel or protecting Judaism. Okay, 17, devoted. Absolutely and irrevocably consecrated so that it cannot be redeemed. So in other words, the word cherem here. The term cherem also connotes that which is sentenced to utter destruction. Both these connotations are intended here. What could be completely destroyed should be so treated. Indestructible materials, such as metals, were to be consecrated to God and not used for secular purposes. Verse 18 on page 30, keep yourselves. There is nothing corresponding to yourselves in the Hebrew. Kimchi, one of the medieval commentators, renders, keep everybody, yourselves and others, from the devoted thing. For this reason, Achan's trespass was imputed to all Israel. All right, so this assumes that we've read ahead and know who Achan is. So just keep that in mind. We'll read about Achan soon. The camp of Israel accursed, see Deuteronomy 7:25. And trouble it, all Israel are surety for one another is a rabbinic maxim. Here too, we have the doctrine of collective responsibility. Joshua's insistence on this point is easily understood. The war of conquest was to be free from looting, which was a normal feature of ordinary warfare. Brass, rather bronze. Again, not copper, translating the word Nechoshet here. Holy unto the Lord, synonymous with devoted to the Lord in verse 17. The wall fell down flat. Kimchi suggests that only the portion of the wall opposite the Israelite army fell, so that every man went straight before him. It was on another part of the wall that Rahab's house was situated. So that's interesting too, that a medieval commentator would suggest that the entire city wall didn't fall down, only the part of the wall that they needed to have the army enter the city. They took the city. G.A. Smith observes of Jericho, in war, she has always been easily taken. That her walls fell down at the sound of Joshua's trumpets, it's no exaggeration, but the soberest summary of all her history. However, as pointed out in verse 5, archaeological research reveals that the words literally describe what happened. Okay, interesting. They set themselves without the camp of Israel. The two spies saved them as they had sworn to do, but they would not risk that intermingling with the Canaanites against which the Israelites had been repeatedly warned. Moreover, Rahab and her family came under the ban and so could not be allowed within the camp. Later, by means of some ritual purification, the ban was removed from off them. See on verse 25. 25, unto this day, that is, some of Rahab's descendants were dwelling in the midst of Israel when this book was written. Buildeth this city, page 32, that is, as a city, complete with walls, but he did not forbid its resettlement. In fact, it was inhabited even in his own lifetime. So, chapter 18, see also Judges 3 and 2 Samuel. With the loss of his firstborn, etc., the opening phrase, cursed be, makes it clear that Joshua was not thinking of the heathen practice of human sacrifice at the founding of a city. Therefore, it would appear that the statement in 1 Kings 16 concerning Hiel, who rebuilt Jericho in the reign of Achav, and here's the verse, with Aviram, his firstborn, he laid the foundation thereof, and with his youngest son, Seguv, he set up the gates thereof, according to the word of the Lord, which he spoke by the hand of Joshua, refers to the fulfillment of the curse and not to human sacrifice. Right, so we have to look at 1 Kings 16 to see King Achab rebuilding the city of Jericho against Joshua's will, and then I guess his two kids die.
I don't understand 26 commentary.
What's that?
Joshua did not object to resettlement.
Resettlement is one thing. Rebuilding the walls is something else.
You have to have everything was.
I don't know how the resettlement happened. We'll have to see when we go on. All right, so let's look at Alter. We have 7 minutes. Let's see what Alter says in his commentary on this chapter. So on page 30 in his book, The Mighty Warriors. The Masoretic text lacks "and," which has been added in the translation. Town. At most, Jericho would have had a scant few thousand inhabitants, so city is an exaggeration. How he knows this, I don't know. 7 priests, 7 ram's horns on the 7th day, 7 times. The rite devised to bring down the walls of the town involves a quadrupling of the sacred number 7. But the destruction of the town is also an anti-creation story. 6 days they go around the wall, and on the climatic 7th day it collapses and the town is reduced to rubble. That's interesting. Ram's horns, these were primitive trumpets that produced a shrill and piercing sound. They were used to assemble troops in battle and at coronations. So that's, I guess, the shofar hayovel is the ram's horn. He translates it the same way. The people, given the military context, may have its secondary sense of troops. Blowing, I'm on 31 now. The consonantal text seems to read "they blew," but the Masoretic marginal correction properly has this as "blowing." Until the moment, the literal sense of the Hebrew is "until the day," but the word for day is often a fluid indicator of time. The ban, this is what he calls cherem. Cherem is translated here as ban. This total prescription of destruction, cherem, of the conquered city, which means annihilating its population and its animals, and, at least in this instance, dedicating all objects of value to the Lord's treasury, is the grimmest aspect of this triumphalist story. The enactment of the cherem is in keeping with the reiterated injunction in Deuteronomy to exterminate the native population of Canaan. That project is what Moshe Weinfeld has called a utopian plan because it's highly unlikely that it was ever acted upon. For the Deuteronomist, it's a brutal way of expressing the absolute separation from the pagan population, a separation that never really occurred, called for in his program of uncompromising monotheism, and the hallmark of the Deuteronomist is often detectable in Joshua. The cherem was not an Israelite invention, as there is archaeological evidence that it was sometimes practiced by various Canaanite peoples. So the idea of cherem here, Alter is saying, reflects the attitude of the author of the book, that what should be done with the native pagan population. Except that Rachav the whore, so he translates it as whore, shall live and whoever is with her in the house. There is, of course, a contradiction here with the story of the collapse of the wall. If the wall around the town collapsed, how could Rachav, whose house was in the wall, have been saved? And what good would the scarlet thread, which implied protection against conscious human destroyers, have done? The medieval Hebrew commentator David Kimchi tried to save the consistency of the text by proposing that only one part of the wall fell, through which breach the Israelites entered the town, though all the encircling with ram's horns certainly leads one to imagine that the entire wall came down. One suspects that the story of the two spies and the story of the ram's horns reflect two different traditions about the conquest of Jericho. Indeed, if the plan was to bring down the walls miraculously, there would scarcely have been any need to reconnoiter the town and surrounding terrain, and the tale of the spies appears to assume a scenario in which the Israelite warriors will break into the city using conventional means of warfare. Okay. Lest you covet, the received text reads, lest you put under the ban, which doesn't make much sense. The translation follows the Septuagint, the Greek translation, which appears to have used a Hebrew text that showed pen tachmedu, a reversal of consonants and a dalet for the similar looking resh, lest you covet. Okay. The people, so in other words, what to do with the people and the objects of the city. Don't covet after it. The people let out a great shout, and the wall fell where it stood. Attempts have been made to recover a historical kernel for this fabulous event by proposing that it records the memory of an earthquake that leveled Jericho. In fact, Jericho is built on a seismic fault and has been subject to earthquakes over the ages. But nothing in the telling of the tale remotely suggests an earthquake. The ground is not said to move, and the destruction occurs through the deployment of sevens and the ram's horns blasts and the shouting. One can also dismiss the idea of shock waves of sound splitting the walls as a scientific non-starter. The whole point of the story is its miraculous character. Almost everywhere in biblical narrative, Israel triumphs not through any martial powers, which get scant representation, but because God battles for Israel. Compare the Song of the Sea, the Song of Deborah, Moses' upraised arms, and the defeat of the Amalekites. This story then is framed to vividly illustrate how the Israelite conquest of the first principal Canaanite town in the Jordan Valley is entirely due to the spectacular intervention of the Lord, who gives Joshua the detailed instructions for the procedures of circumambulating the town with the ark and the ram's horns. It should also be noted that the extensive archaeological exploration of Jericho indicate that its conquest by Joshua could not have taken place. There was a very old town on this site, but it was destroyed by the Middle Bronze Age. And at the putative time of Joshua's conquest in the late Bronze Age, toward the end of the 13th century BCE, there had been no walled town on this site, at least for a couple centuries. The writer, no doubt, had in mind Jericho's antiquity. It's one of the oldest cities in the world, and its role as eastern gateway to Canaan, but historically, it could not have been an object of Joshua's conquest. Okay, so Alter, I think, knows the latest archaeology, and that is what he's sharing with us. And again, it shouldn't bother us, because again, this is a biblical account. meant for religious reasons, not to teach history. So we shouldn't get caught up on taking it literally, and shouldn't bother us that the archaeology doesn't correlate with what's written here. The young spies, only here they identified as Na'arim, lads or young men, though it's possible that the term has its secondary sense of elite soldiers. The Lord's house, this phrase is an anachronism. What Barry said, where is the Lord's house? Where's the treasury? In general, it refers to the temple, because at the time of the conquest, there would have been only a portable sanctuary, not referred to as a house. Right, so that's how I explained it to you, but that's Alter is just recognizing your point. She has dwelled in the midst of Israel to this day. This clause must mean that Rahav's descendants have dwelled in the midst of Israel to this day. It's thus an ideological note explaining how a particular Canaanite clan came to be naturalized Israelites. Right, because the rest of Joshua and Judges and Kings talks about how the total annihilation did not happen, and there was mixing all the time. Cursed be the man who will rebuild this town. The reason for the implacability toward Jericho is not entirely clear, since there's no indication that its inhabitants perpetrated war crimes as did the Amalekites in Exodus. Perhaps this should be understood in the context of the miraculous destruction of the walls. That event is a token for the laying down of the inhabitants of the land before the invading Israelites, something that never happened historically. And so as a sign and symbol of the whole conquest, the town raised through divine intervention should never be rebuilt. With his firstborn shall he found it, and with his youngest set up its portals. The solemnity of the vow was reinforced by casting this dire prediction in a line of poetry. Rashi nicely catches the narrative progression from the first verset to the second. At the beginning of the foundation, when he rebuilds it, his firstborn son will die, whom he will bury, and go on until the youngest dies at the completion of the work, which is setting up the portals. In 1 Kings 16, it's recorded that at the time of Achav, Hiel of Beit El rebuilt Jericho. With Aviram, his firstborn, he founded it, and with Seguv, his youngest, he set up its portals, according to the word of the Lord that he spoke through Joshua, son of Nun. Joshua's curse may have been formulated to explain a calamitous event that occurred 3.5 centuries later. Okay, so that was chapter 6, and we continue the story. Achan will appear in the next chapter. Yes, Barry?
I was just going to say, your comment about, biblical history, biblical stories versus history.
Right.
The reason that I find myself always interested in Alter's translations is even something that simple as saying the slaughter probably didn't happen. It was probably a warning to the other tribes, because this was what was done throughout all of the Canaanite tribes, and we were just going to do the same thing, almost as a warning. And that kind of, it softens what is otherwise a not very politically correct or happy story.
Well, I don't think it has to be politically correct, because that's anachronistic too. We're putting our political correctness back into the Bible, which the Bible has its own sense of political correctness.
Yes, but slaughtering every living thing.
Yeah, it's a big deal to us today. Absolutely. But I'm not so sure it's a big deal ethically in the time of the Bible. I'm really not sure. And I think, yes, though it's fair for practical purposes, how we're supposed to act today, to ask the question about what to apply from biblical times to our lives today. I'm not so sure it's right to apply it in reverse. In other words, we need to base how we act today on what we learned from our ancestors, but we should not apply to how we act today to how our ancestors acted, and then judge them for being bad or good based on what we understand as bad or good. Okay, so that's all I'm saying. So I'm saying that Alter bringing it up means, I think in the time of the author of Joshua, there was a question whether Cherem was the appropriate response to dealing with Canaanites or not. So in the time in which the story is supposed to take place, there's a question how to deal with the Canaanites. Do we totally annihilate them or do we live with them? Okay. So to be continued.
And it's certainly been historically, I mean, from America's conquest of the native tribes, I mean, to Africa, I mean, it
Right.
is throughout history, but we're talking about a biblical story that ultimately
Yeah,
reflects
so that's
right and
that's the
wrong.
danger of it. That's the danger that it can be applied to literalists of Quran and Bible today, in how the literalists, the fundamentalists, deal with people who are different from them. Right? And so that the fundamentalists could say that, well, since the Bible talks about cherem, we need to deal with the other in a cherem way. Yeah, so that's the danger of keeping it in the Bible and reading it literally. All right. Have a good day, everybody, and Shabbat
Okay.
Shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Shalom.